All right, hello everyone. We'll let's get set up. All right, so we're going to go through. So a little while ago, a couple months ago, I spoke on the secret rapture theory, and we sort of went through that, which I'll recap today as well. And we compared it to how it stacks up against the Bible, which it doesn't. But when we go through that, there is a key prophecy which the people that believe in the secret rapture theory, they like to look at what's called Daniel's 70-week prophecy. And so this prophecy is often misinterpreted to suit other people's doctrines and beliefs. So that's why I thought it would make a good second part to be able to go through this and explain it in detail and see what it actually is telling us. Now, originally we were just going to have a part 2 and I was going to fit the whole thing in, but last night there was a last-minute decision to maybe break it up, so we'll have a part 3 as well, but we'll set the foundations today. Right. Cool. It works. So, quick recap here. Firstly, we touched on the Reformation, which was started by Martin Luther, where he nailed a 95-point thesis on the Wittenberg Cathedral door in 1517 AD. That was sort of seen as a catalyst for the Reformation, where Protestants were sort of stood up against the Catholic Church, which was really mighty and powerful at that time. And this was also occurring at the same time where the Bible was getting published and getting translated into different languages, such as English or German, where previously it had been really kept under lock and key by the Catholic Church at the time, and it was kept in Latin, where not a lot of people understood it, could read it. And so the Reformation was sort of a way of trying to get the Bible available and see what it actually tells us. This Reformation, it led to a counter-Reformation because, well, the Catholic Church weren't going to take this sort of laying down with the people going against them now or suggesting things, especially in the book of Revelation there, against them. So there was a counter-Reformation, which there was one in particular, a Spanish Jesuit named Francisco Ribera, and he came up with a futuristic view of the Bible, and which is now labelled as futurism. This was used to sort of deflect some of those implications away from them because it took all the sort of accusations that they were facing at the time and it just pushed it way out into the future, that nothing could apply to us now, that it's all just going to happen in the future. So try to take the heat off them. This view filtered through the ages, so it sort of didn't go away, it kept getting picked up, and with a few groups believing it. In particular, there was one man named John Darby in the 1800s in America that really pushed this view, and that sort of is how that view came into a lot of Protestant and even Pentecostal churches too, started to believe in this futurism concept. Futurism is the theory and the idea which paved the way for the secret rapture theory. And who believe in such things, just listed out here as a time of great tribulation, so that's a set time there. They believe that there is a one sort of mighty Antichrist figure who's going to raise up and is going to establish a one-world government that he controls. And then, of course, they believe that Jesus is going to return, and he's going to do it in a way that secretly raptures a few saints, and which hence the name, the secret rapture theory. And then afterwards, he's going to come back and rapture or take up the rest of the saints after that. We then compared this to the truth. We looked at the Bible and we sort of tried to say, okay, well, these are the theories and doctrine that's being pushed by a particular group of people. Let's see what the Bible tells us. We looked in particular, you can see it, just little recaps there. There's Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 4, and we also looked at Revelation 7 there. And we learned, of course, from the Bible, we know that Jesus is going to return. but we know it's going to be just the once. And when he does return, it's going to be soon. Good, we can see that by the signs of the times, of course, that we're in the end times there. But we know that it's going to be in power and it's going to be in glory. It's not going to be a sort of secret thing that a few people, or it's even, I think they believe babies under the age of 7 get raptured up too, that they're all okay. And then everyone sort of looks around and wonders where they went. And it's not going to be like that. It's going to be powerful when the Lord returns through the clouds. It's for every eye to see. And we know as well, where I said they have a great tribulation, we believe, of course, in life, in our day-to-day, we all go through trials and tribulations. That's our part of life, of being here on earth. And we got to look to the Lord standing in faith, that we know Jesus is going to protect us. We know he's given us the Holy Spirit, which is the comforter for us, and that's how we get through trials and tribulations. We don't have to have a sort of hope that maybe we're going to be raptured away, so we don't have to go through a set time of tribulation, but rather we have the Lord day to day to help us. And yes, as I said, we know Jesus ascended up into heaven there in Acts 1, and that he's going to return in like manner. All right. So I wanted to touch on a few separate points about secret rapture and how, in particular, that sort of relates to the prophecy in Daniel 9, which we're going to look at soon, called the 70 weeks prophecy. Firstly, they sort of relegate Daniel's 70th week, again, to a time in the future, so fitting in with that whole futurism concept. They do this by separating the 69th week and the 70th week, and they separate it by a gap of about 2,000 years there. And then they also add another gap which is a 7-year gap between Christ coming the first time for that secret rapture, and then Christ coming again for the saints that he didn't get the first time. And in that 7-year period, they break it up into 2 halves. So it's 3.5 years of peace. That's where the Antichrist is going to get, secretly to work. No one's going to know, but people are going to get the mark of the beast, and all this is happening secretly for 3.5 years. And then there's 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, where the sort of mask comes off, this Antichrist figure, and there's sort of like an all-out war in the spiritual of this Antichrist figure and the saints and all that sort of stuff. And basically, whoever survives this time is then going to be lucky enough to have that second chance of salvation. So in saying all of this, I don't want your heads to get filled with it all, because we proved already in the first presentation that that's all false. That's the doctrine and the belief that the secret rapture and the futurism people believe. That's not what the Revival Fellowship, that's not what we believe. And so we're going to go through and we'll explain it correctly. But first, I just wanted to go through the 3 different views or points of view of Bible prophecy, just for a bit of foundation here, that I thought it'd be good to sort of explain this. That firstly, there's a preterist view, and this was also devised by a Spanish Jesuit named Luis de Alcazar, also in the 1500s. And so the Jesuits are this Society of Jesus that the Catholic Church instituted in the 1500s here. It was in 1540. So it was all founded by the Pope. And this view is that all Bible prophecy, it's already been fulfilled. They believe that relates only to that contemporary time of the writer. So it's all happened in the past. So having this view, if it was true, it means that large chunks of the Bible, all the Bible prophecy, doesn't really relate to us now, that it was all just in the past and only related to the people, or was relevant to the people back then, and that it doesn't really help Christians in this gospel age. And then we have the second view, the futurist view. So that's what I've already previously explained, but it's the second view of Bible prophecy. Again, it was by this Spanish Jesuit, Ribera. And this theory asserts that many prophecies, especially in Daniel and Revelation, it's all in the future and it's going to be fulfilled in times to come. So if you've noticed that both of these views are from Catholic Jesuits, And so if it was created by these Jesuits and sort of pushed by them, well, then it was obviously supported by the Catholic Church. And the amazing thing is, so this church is supporting both of these views, and yet they're completely contradicting each other. We've got one school of thought that puts everything back in the past. It's not relevant anymore because it already happened. It was only relevant to those people. And then we've got the same church pushing the second view, which is, oh, well, it's all in the future. It hasn't happened yet. Don't worry about it. It's all in the future. Basically, all those people are going to have to worry about it. So it's they're contradicting, and yet it was still supported by these Jesuits here. But I guess that sort of really highlights, well, I don't think, neither of them are correct because they're both already contradicting each other, and this is what the church is pushing. So I'm not going to go into Revelation or explain those sort of scriptures which they were trying to get away from themselves. But really what I wanted to focus on was that it was able to be explained away, that these doctrines that they introduced, it explained away all those sort of accusations that they were facing. And it wasn't achieved by changing the scriptures. It wasn't achieved by even changing descriptions or even the context, but rather it was simply by just reassigning the time of the application for these scriptures. One to ancient history, one for the future. And as I've said, this futuristic view got popularized. There's plenty of movies and books about secret rapture and futurism, and it's been picked up by the Pentecostal churches too. All right, now we have the third view. Gotta love all these pictures I've put up through the presentation too. There's a few funny ones. This third view here, it's the sort of traditional historical view. And this is what we teach. We teach that Bible prophecy, and in particular the book of Revelation, it's to be had with a historical view. This means that Bible prophecy is seen as really highlighting key moments, whether they're political, economical, or symbolic there, where it's religious events as well. And whatever happened, it happened at that time, but it also still holds relevance to us today as well for the church. And there's a lot of church leaders throughout times, like Luther and Wycliffe there, and there's other movements by Fox and Moody, just some names of people that did hold on to this view of Bible prophecy. And again, they did it even though there was great persecution against them during that time too. And because, as I mentioned, the Catholic Church didn't want this sort of stuff out there and didn't want the Bible translated into all these other languages. And people were martyred for trying to translate and trying to get scriptures out there. All right. Well, actually, before I get into Daniel, just something different here. I just wanted to see, because we read from the King James Bible, and we believe this is the most accurate translation from the original Hebrew and the Greek. But if you can turn to, so you can get out your Bibles, but just the very preface of the Bible, so before the contents, before all the books are listed, this might fall really flat or it might work. We'll see how we go. But I just picked up on it the other day, so I didn't check in any other Bibles. So we'll see how we go. It's in my one. I'll just pass mine around. But so in the preface there of the King James Bible, there's a part towards the end, about 2 or 3 paragraphs up from the end. And this is just the preface here, and it says in words, it says, so that if, on the one side, if, I don't know if anyone's been able to find it, you can go to the preface, towards the end, anyway, it's all right, it's probably a bit hard to find, because it's just in paragraphs here. I'll read it out. In the translation it says, so that if, on the one side, we shall be traduced by popish persons at home or abroad, who therefore will malign us because we are poor instruments to make God's holy truth to yet more and more known unto the people whom they desire still to keep in ignorance and darkness. I don't know if anyone's been able to find that, but basically that really highlights to me that there was a time in history, not too long ago, only hundreds of years ago, where the Bible was not freely available, and that people were actually martyred and actually persecuted and had to go through lots of tribulation by the Catholic system just to be able to read the Bible. And to me, that's just something that I never knew previously, that that we take for granted how easy it is to buy a Bible. I think the Bible is one of the most sold books, and lots and lots of people, they might not read it, but they have a Bible. And yet there was a time in the 1500s there where that sort of Reformation and everything we've touched on sort of started, where there was lots of persecution against people having a Bible. So anyway, I thought that was all right, but anyway. All right, we'll move on to Daniel. So, to introduce Daniel here, he was just a young boy when he was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar's first invasion of the land of Judah and Jerusalem in the 604 BC to 605. He lived his whole life under foreign rule, first by the Babylonians, then the Medo-Persians. There's no defect found in Daniel's character either. He trusted God. He was very fervent in prayer. He's mentioned in Ezekiel 14 there as being righteous along with Noah and Job. He's mentioned again in Hebrews 11, stopping the mouth of lions. And this part of this prophecy is also mentioned by Jesus too in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, which we might get to. I think we might get to that in the next presentation. And basically, God gave Daniel wisdom and understanding, better than all others in the realm. Because when he refused to eat from the king's table with in Daniel chapter 1 there. So, and he also, studied previous works too, in particular Jeremiah, which gave him some understanding there. And then we move on to a prayer. So we'll go to Daniel and chapter 9. He's a bit older here than the previous picture. So Daniel 9. Just wanted to read a little bit, just verse 3. And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him and to them that keep his commandments. We have sinned and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled, even by the departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments. So this is sort of the start of Daniel's prayer here in chapter 9, where he's going to have an open sort of confession to God. He's really, which was pleasing to God and acceptable to God, and God answers we will soon see with the angel Gabriel. But Daniel was confessing the house of Judah's guilt and their blame for the disobedience there. He prays for the house of Israel too that was previously led out, and he's upset about the desolation of Jerusalem, which is later on in verses 16 and 17. And Daniel prays for the people, and he also prays for himself as well. He admits faults, he confesses to God, he laments over disobedience, he recognizes that people haven't turned back to God, and he also pleads for forgiveness too, and he asks God to act and restore in verse 19 there. And it's just really, because we don't have time to go through it, the whole prayer in detail, but it's just really a great example of how effectual and fervent prayer of a righteous man can avail much. All right, now another foundation for Bible prophecy, which I want to just touch on, is the day-to-year conversion. So in Daniel's prophecies, we find that a week is made up of 7 days. It actually represents 7 years. So a day equals a year. That's an important concept to understand. And it can be found by taking the original context of the Hebrew. Shabua is the word, and it's founded on representing a period of 7. And so it doesn't necessarily mean 7 days, but it can also relate to 7 years as well. And we can also find in Numbers chapter 14 and in Ezekiel 4, where 1 day equals 1 year as well. In Numbers, it's when the children of Israel searched the land for 40 days, not believing God, And so they were then had to bear their iniquities in the wilderness for 40 years. So that's 40 days, 40 years. And then in Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel was told to lay on his side to bear iniquities too. So firstly, it was 390 days for the house of Israel. And there he is counting the days there. And then it was 40 days for the house of Judah. So it was representing the 390 years and 40 years, respectively. So both these examples just highlight that a day is for a year, and it's also used in the context of dealing with iniquity, because in Daniel 9, they've sort of said that the people's iniquity had to be dealt with too. All right, so now here's the actual prophecy, which I'll read through. So it's Daniel 9, verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself, and the people of the Prince shall come and shall destroy the city and sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and the determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So Daniel was very open to God in the prayer, and there was confession, there was intercession there, and he was interrupted by Gabriel that gave him this 70-week prophecy. And so I've put it here, and I've actually bold and underlined just what we're going to focus on first, which is being able to put it onto a timeline. So if we plot the time references, and of course we note that in history even proves that the 70 weeks are not literal weeks there, but they're the 70 prophetic weeks. So firstly, overall, we know we're talking about 70 weeks. That should be pretty straightforward. And where a week is made up of 7 days, we know that. So the 70 weeks times 7, which is the 7 days, is a total of 490 days, which is then, converting days to years, 490 years. So 490 years is the total time for this prophecy. Are we good with that? That sounds good? And so keywords too, just where it says are determined in verse 24 there, the same as is determined. It's basically meaning that it's continuous. So it's a single set of 70 weeks that we're talking about. Remember a common misconception that other people like to do, they single out the 69 weeks, then the 70 week. But of course we know this is all the one, we're not going to split them up. And so the prophecy is really telling us that Judah's been given a sort of probationary period of 70 weeks, during the last of which is when the promised Messiah or anointed one would come, and through a series of events, all of Judah will be restored, redeemed, forgiven for their sins by the Saviour. One that's going to finish the transgression, one that's going to bring in everlasting righteousness. And so we should already be able to see, without me even going into it, that it's going to, of course, point to Jesus and what he's already accomplished for us. And yet the Jews, they're still looking for the arrival of their Messiah and have rejected Jesus. So, getting complicated here. But no, I just wanted to break it down if your brain starts going like that with all these sort of things in there. But I just want to break it down a bit more. So we've got the initial 7 weeks that we read. So that's 7 times 7, 49 days, 49 years, right? We've got that. Then we have the additional 62 weeks. So 62 times 7, because of the days, is 434 days, so 434 years. So we've got 49 years, then we're adding on 434 years, And the reason it's 62, in case not familiar, a score is 20 years. So when you're talking about 3 score, it's meaning 3 lots of 20, which is 60. So the coming of the Messiah is prophesied to be after 49 plus 434, which is 483 years. And then then there's going to be the start of the final week, during which the Messiah is going to be cut off. And this is for a period of 7 years total, because it's 1 week, 7 days, 7 years. So the 483 plus 7 is 490 years total. All right. You don't need an accounting degree, hopefully. All right. So if we've established, all right, 490 years total, that's great. Now the next thing to identify is a starting point. So we've got the time frame, we need the start. So we can read in verse 25. It's from the going forth of the commandment to restore Jerusalem. So this is where the countdown is going to begin. And in the Bible, we can identify 4 possible commands or edicts or decrees that were issued in possible connection to this starting point. And so there's 4 listed here. There's the 4 by 3 different Medo-Persian kings. So I was wanting to just quickly go through them. The first is from King Cyrus, who reigned from 538 to 530 BC. His decree is recorded in 2 Chronicles 36, 22 to 23, and also in Ezra 1. And then further details given in Ezra 6 as well there. But basically, I was wanting to read through it, but for the sake of time, it just basically mentions about rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem. However, it's very limited in scope because it doesn't mention the city itself, it doesn't mention the walls, it doesn't mention any restoration of the religious freedoms of the people of that time. So that's the first one. Then we have the second one, which is from King Darius. And this was in defiance of a previous sort of stop order, and which prompted the Persian governor of the time to write to the King Darius and sort of question if the Jews actually had a right to start rebuilding this temple again. And King Darius ordered a search of the archives there in the king's treasure house, and he found a scroll which had King Cyrus's original decree there. And he read that and reaffirmed, yep, okay, they can go ahead with building the temple, and told the others that they should try and stay away and let them build. And he also ordered that provisions for the build could also be given by the king's own treasury as well. And so the construction of the temple was then completed in 515 BC. Then we have the third, which is from Artaxerxes. And this was issued in the 7th year of his reign. And by this time, the temple had been completed for more than 50 years. And we will just turn to this one. It's just in Ezra 7. Ezra 7, I'm just going to read out starting in verse 8. And he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. This is Ezra. For upon the first day of the 1st month began he to go up to Babylon, from Babylon, and on the 1st day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of his God upon him. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. And in verse 11 it says, Now this is the copy of the letter that the king Xerxes gave unto Ezra the priest, the scribe, even a scribe of the words of the commandments of the Lord, and of his statutes to Israel. And then he goes through, all the way through chapter 7 there, and gives a lot of detail about the decree that's issued. But the major milestone here, why this particular decree is important, is that it was the most detailed. The number one, it's a lot of detail in the Bible, where the others are sort of briefly mentioned. The timing is given there very accurately, but it also made possible for Judah to be able to reconcile their neglect of what they've been doing wrong against the Lord. And It also ended the Medo-Persian supervision of the city, and it granted the people of Jerusalem, who had returned from Babylon, sort of control over their own local and civil administration and their religious worship. They were able to work it out themselves. They were able to keep the Lord's commands and statutes and ordinances and all that sort of stuff. So that's why it's this one is in particular significant. And then there's a fourth one there, which is from Nehemiah. And if I can find it, yep. So Nehemiah's prayer had been that people hadn't really stayed true to their word. They hadn't really kept the commandments. And so the king then issues, it's more of a bunch of letters to him, enabling him to recommence the sort of work there, and gave permission that he could now rebuild the city and the gates and repair the walls. But it can be sort of seen where he's reaffirming that original decree. And this was the final stages of Jerusalem's restoration. All right, so with identifying the starting date, we have the four from three different kings, and we have to ask, well, which is the correct starting point? Well, in verse 25, which we read through in Daniel 9, said, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem," so that's the start. And it mentions two parts. One, the prophecy relates to the command to restore and build, but also later on it then says it's going to be in troublous times as well. So the greater application of restoring Jerusalem means it's more comprehensive than just building a temple or just building a wall. But as I touched on, it's not just the physical, but rather it includes how they can reinstate sacrifices, how they can really worship now in the temple freely, how they've got their religious sort of control back. And so all those things are really key factors there. So in comparison, you should be able to mark off the Darius and Cyrus straight away. And then we can see that the last one was sort of confirming this one. So therefore, this is the going forth of the command. So therefore, we stick with 457 BC, which is the starting point. So plugging that in now to the timeline, we've got 457 BC as the start, and we can move through the first 69 weeks of the prophecy, which was 483 years. And then, so we start with negative 457, we plus 483, we then plus 1, because there's no 0 BC, so it's like a little adjustment there, and that gets us to 27 AD. And it's had a note here, won't go through it, but we're talking about solar years. 27 AD is when Jesus began his ministry, where Jesus was 30 years old, and he was baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River, and he was immediately anointed by the Holy Spirit. You can read that in Matthew 3, and that's the real sort of start of his ministry there. And Jesus being 30 is very significant because in the Old Testament, the Levites were not allowed to perform duties of a priest until they were 30 years old. That's in Numbers 4, which is, so that's why Jesus waited till he was 30. And so we can see the completion of the first 69 weeks, where we're waiting for that Messiah to come, is completed at 27 AD. So it marks the beginning of Jesus. And that's the start of Daniel's 70th week. We'll skip through John the Baptist here, but if you'd recalculated, this time using lunar years and a different start date, you can get the start of John the Baptist's ministry, which is 25.6 AD there, because John was very pivotal in sort of paving the way. That was touched on today, and that the kingdom of heaven was at hand, and led on to Jesus there. And but we'll just fly through that. So just to end on here, we've identified that the 70th week can follow straight on from the 69th week. It's in line with the historical or the traditional view of Bible prophecy. And we can see here that John the Baptist's ministry was just sort of like the last part, occupied the last part of Daniel's 69th week. And then, having prepared the way of the Lord, passed it over to Jesus to start that 70th and final week of the prophecy. And So it starts from 457 BC, and it goes all the way, the end will be 34 AD total, because the last week is starting in 27 AD and we plus the 7 years. So that's part 2, and the next step is to then, I'll tell you what, lucky I didn't keep going for the rest of it. We haven't even hit the detail of the 70th week yet, but basically what we're going to look at next time is what was accomplished in that final week. Of course, the Messiah has been cut off during that time. We know Jesus crucified, and we can sort of all plug this in back into that timeline and see how it all works. But for now, I'll leave it there. Amen.